Welcome to Austin Liti Limits, a series where authors talk to authors about books and writing. I'm Scott Simmergren.
And I'm Larry Brill. You know, Scott and I have had our share of successes.
And awards.
His last novel, To Squeeze a Prairie Dog, won 3 book awards. His latest novel, The Benevolent Lords of Sometimes Island, has been getting great reviews.
Larry has won his share of awards too. His latest book is out now, The Printer and the Strumpet. Here at Austin Liti Limits, we're working with our good friends at Book People to introduce readers to our favorite authors.
Well, naturally, during these days of pandemic, we've had to move our author interviews online until the bookstore is up and running again 100%.
In this episode, I had the chance to talk with New York Times bestselling author Kevin Wilson.
Kevin grew up in Winchester, Tennessee. At the age of 10, he became obsessed with rap music, something that still has a grip on him to this day. He attended the Vanderbilt University Creative Writing Program and received his MFA in fiction from the University of Florida. All of that led to his best-selling novels, The Family Fang and Nothing to See Here. And currently, Kevin is an associate professor in the English department at Sewanee, the University of the South.
Please welcome Austin Liti Limits, Kevin Wilson.
Hey, thanks for having me.
How you doing, Kevin?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah, the pandemic treating you well?
Yeah, it's not treating me worse than most people, I think. Yeah.
You know, when it started, I remember, you may remember this, but there were a lot of people saying, hey, this is a great time to write a novel because you have all this time at home. And I was feeling all this existential dread at the time and wasn't writing at all. What was it like for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't write that much anyways, but the minute it hit with I have 2 boys and they were with us 24/7. So I knew there was no way that I was going to get writing done. And I didn't try.
Right.
It just didn't seem possible. And I'm only now really getting back to where, reading is something that I feel like I have the brain space for, which is honestly as important, if not more important to me than writing.
Right. So what's a book you've read lately that kind of defied your expectations a little bit and really, really pleased that sensibility you got?
Well, I think the novel that I'm thinking of that, because of the idea of defied expectations, is a novel by Harry Crews called The Gospel Singer. It was his first novel. Harry Crews is a Southern writer, and Penguin is reissuing his work. And so I was going to do the foreword for this book, which I had read as an undergraduate in college. That was the last time. And I had some memory of it. I remember liking it, but I went back I was like, well, let's see if I remember this. And I didn't. I certainly didn't remember how incredible it was. It was this lovely moment of little pieces came back to me, but not the full weight of them as I read it now, as a 42-year-old. And
right.
So that book blew me away.
So I revisit books quite often. I studied English at the University of Texas, and I've gone back and read books that affected me when I was younger to see if I still felt the same way. One that I went back and read and didn't enjoy as much was Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. I think I found it as an older person to be a lot more juvenile than I remembered it being. But then I enjoy Slaughterhouse-Five more now as an older person, and I didn't understand it as much as a younger person. And I just think because of his discussions about death, I don't think I really understood like I do now.
That's interesting because I reread Slaughterhouse-Five last year, having read it in high school.
Right.
I found it in the library. I think my mom had told me about it. But again, it was one of those things where none of it really landed when I was a teenager in the way that it did when I was older.
So what do you think about it now?
I mean, I love it. I love the wildness of it. I love the humor of it. I love the empathy, which I think I come back to more and more in my 40s. Is I like wildness and I like absurdity, but at the heart of it, if there is some kind of empathy, some kind of tenderness,
Right.
it resonates with me.
Have you ever watched any videos with him speaking about how he studied story structure?
No, I've
He
not.
has a, you should go look on YouTube. So he used to speak quite a bit, and he created a graph, and he charted almost every story he's ever read. And basically the graph goes, on the X, it's beginning and end, and the Y is good news, bad news.
Hmm.
And then he would chart every story. And so, for instance, Cinderella, starts low and then it goes high and it goes like this. And he goes, well, then the metamorphosis, it starts at bad news and it goes worse, 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 worse. But his lectures are so great.
I'll have to check them out.
Yeah, you should. Also, if you see me referring to something, I'm just looking at my notes, so we'll edit some of this stuff out. So the premise of children catching on fire, that's a motif that's in a lot of your work. And I came to you starting at Nothing to See Here, and then I went back. And of course, I noticed the screenplay and the family fang, and I went, oh, I can't believe this. But I guess that's been a recurring motif. But when did it crystallize in such a way that you thought that like this funny little premise, which is kind of like the setup for a joke, could actually turn into a novel? Do you remember when that crystallized for you?
Yeah, I mean, because spontaneous human combustion, or the idea, of exploding, of bursting into flames, is something that I've been obsessed with since I was a kid, since I first read about it, and it's just one of those things that kind of locked into my brain. I come back to it a lot. It's an image I have in my head, but that doesn't mean that it's worthy of like a novel, right? Like,
Yeah, exactly.
It recurs. But in my earlier work, I think what I was obsessed with is the idea of what does it mean to have something inside of you that could combust? What does it mean to have that kind of self-destructive capability, whether you want to have it or not? And that was all good. I like that. But for Nothing to See Here, now that I have children, right, and I have, as an adult, got diagnosed with Tourette's, and that was helpful, kind of maybe wish I'd been diagnosed earlier. That could have maybe given me some clarity on my situation. But then we had kids, and my oldest son, when he was very young, exhibited some of those traits. We started to notice it, and the pediatrician said, well, it looks like it, but it could also go away. There's no real way to know it too.
Mm-hmm.
But I remember feeling that kind of intense guilt that like, I'd made this person partly, I brought them into the world, and had I put them at a distinct disadvantage because of just how faulty I was. And that was hard. And so that became the premise for Nothing to See Here. Was I knew how to take care of myself if I burst into flames. But what I wanted to figure out is, how do you protect the people that you love when they have that capability,
Mm-hmm.
right? What is our responsibility to vulnerable people? And so that's when it unlocked, right? It was no longer like, oh, I've got this fire inside of me that's going to blow up. It was recognizing that other people are just as capable, and how do you take care of them?
Right. And so tell me about the relationship between Lillian and Madison. It's kind of a unique dynamic. So where did Lillian come in as the narrator for this story? How did you discover her personality?
Well, I mean, I knew immediately I wanted to write a book about these children that burst into flames, but I knew that the children couldn't do a lot of the work in the story. Like, they're bursting into flames, right? They can't really be expected to do more than that. So I needed somebody who was watching over them to kind of be a witness. And I knew that I didn't want it to be familial. I was trying to not make it someone who was biologically connected. And I was like, oh, it's a nanny, it's a babysitter. And once I figured that out, I started thinking about who would be in a position to accept a job to take care of fire children. And I was like, oh, it's someone like Lillian, who's disadvantaged, who hasn't had many opportunities in life, who's kind of at a low point. She'd be the one to kind of walk into the fire. And then once I knew that, like, who would take on this job, the voice really started to crystallize. It would be someone who was kind of sarcastic, a little profane, but maybe as a kind of defense mechanism so that the world didn't touch her. And then, you know, that's what you do, right? With writing is those little things start to accrue. You start to figure out more and more like, okay, well, grew up poor. Okay, she's in a bad situation. And little by little, those personality traits and the way that they talk, it all starts to kind of adhere.
Right. Let's give some kudos to Maren Ireland, who narrated your audiobook. She did. I love that she has a lilting drawl that is so perfect. Did you have any say in in picking Maren, or how did that work out?
I did. I mean, I've always, I love audiobooks. I listen to them all the time, but I'd never listened to my own. But when they gave me a list of people, you know, Marin was on there, and I was like, oh, I love her work. I've seen her in lots of stuff and think she's incredible, but she'd also played a small part in the film adaptation of The Family Fang. So I like this idea of like her doing it. And so I wanted her to read it. And my oldest son asked if we could read the book. We read together every night. And I thought, I don't really want to read my own book to him. But so we listened to it. And it was the first time I've listened to an audiobook, and I loved her voice.
Right.
I loved the voice that she gave the characters. It sounded correct to me.
Yeah. I love that. So I have a book that I wrote called Sammy and Budgie. And in that book, the main character is Simon Birchwood. He has a young son who's a special needs son who can see the future. And of course, you're obsessed with kids catching on fire. So what do you think it is about kids that makes it seem probable or a likely premise that they can harness these kind of supernatural abilities?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things before I had children, I wasn't really comfortable around kids. I wasn't around kids all that much. I didn't know what they were like, you know, other than my own experiences as a kid, which I can barely remember. But once we had kids, one of the things you immediately understand is just how strange they are, how wild it is to watch them come to the world in such new ways. And then you think, oh, my child is this special, weird little kid. And then you watch basically every single other kid in their sphere, and you're like, oh, no, they're all strange. They're all very weird,
right?
In kind of lovely ways. And so, I mean, there's an attraction to that idea of, one, that children are kind of blameless in my mind, and the way that they come into the world and experience it is very instinctual and strange, and their brains are forming this kind of logic that's really intriguing to me. So I like writing about them because in some ways, when you have a fully formed adult character, you can kind of predict pretty much what they're going to do, you know,
Totally.
And the surprises are surprises, but you can still see them coming.
Yeah.
And children just constantly are kind of moving in the direction you don't expect. And that's fun as a writer.
Right. When my kids were young and in elementary school, I used to go volunteer at their school. And I noticed that kids from kindergarten to fourth grade had this amazing ability and like this deep well of creativity that was unaffected by how anybody else thought of them. And so I'd go into the art class and I'd watch them. And a first grader, you know, he'd throw some paint on, some macaroni, and be like, bam, this is awesome. And people, you know, they'd go, nah, and he'd be like, no, it's awesome. And, you know, adults aren't like that. Like that ability, you know, disappears after puberty, I think.
Yeah, and I think as I'm noticing, because my oldest is now 12, I mean, one of the things also that's kind of lovely and tender is to watch them know that they're growing up and watch them start to assert some adult things, you know, like their voice and their mannerisms, and yet they still have those childlike impulses that are really lovely and wonderful. And so I like that kind of constant back and forth as they try to shape who they're going to be.
Right.
You know, I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I do like watching it.
Yeah. So I'd watched an interview with you once where you said that you didn't write every day. You only write a couple months out of the year. And so what do you make of, and that's something I don't write every day either. In fact, you're the first writer that I've heard say that in a public forum, that they don't do that. So what do you make of the advice that writers should write every day to be great?
I mean, it's just like anything, it's prescriptive, which means that it doesn't really hold true for everyone, right? Like It sounds nice. And in theory, I would love to do that. And I have friends that do it, you know, that they through sheer tyranny of will, they have 2 hours a day in the morning where they write. But I'm just not, I've learned I'm not capable of that. And I remember there was a writer who came to my college when I was an undergrad and said something to the effect of, to be a writer, you have to every day get up, put on a suit, hitch up your tie, get your briefcase, walk out of the house, then walk back into your house and sit at your desk and write like it was your job. And I was 19 and probably high when he said it, but I was like, oh,
Right.
that sounds terrible. You know, I don't want this. I don't want to do that. And I think there is this feeling of being an imposter, but also I don't know how anybody with kids writes every day. Like I
Right.
can barely manage to write in the brief times that I have. So um, eventually what I realized is that I have 5 books I've published, right? So I've done it. And I don't write every day. So I have some evidence to the fact that it still works and you can be a serious writer even if you don't write every day. To my mind, what's important to me is I think about writing every day, you know, like
Yes.
when I'm playing with the kids or we go on a walk or I'm, you know, making dinner with my wife. There are moments where I'm allowing myself to think about that story that I want to tell. And sometimes I think it's better for me to hold it for a long time instead of
Mm.
trying to write it out. It lets me kind of figure out what the implications are before I have to reckon with them on the page. And so for me, that's writing. You know, I don't know what else to call that except it is generative.
Right. Let's talk about walks for a minute. When I was writing my last couple books, I would go for a walk every day over lunch for at least a half an hour and just kind of ruminate about whatever plot points or character stuff I was working on. And I would always have an epiphany on a walk. Does that happen with you too?
I find walking to be really helpful. You know, I live on a mountain in Tennessee in the woods. And so walking, um, just the kind of peacefulness of it is really lovely. And now with my sons, my oldest, he always listens to an audiobook while he walks with me. So we're very close to each other, but there's separation. He's in his little world and I'm thinking about what I want to write. And yet I like that close proximity. And there's something about that weirdness of movement, close proximity, but the freedom to be in my head that sometimes unlocks things a lot easier than if I were at home at my desk.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, here's the time in the show. We call it the lightning round. It
Mm-hmm.
is a concept that we stole from inside the Actors Studio, but it's not their concept. They stole it from Marcel Proust, who stole it from Bernard Pivot, and lots of people have used this format. But this is our format. So, are you ready for our lightning round?
I am, yeah.
Okay. What is your favorite word?
Weird. I use it so much that it has to be.
Excellent. What is your least favorite word?
It's weird because I think it's probably just a word that if I say it aloud that I don't like. So it's a word like hill or sail, SELL, anything that highlights my Southern accent when I say it aloud. Those are the words that I really trip up on. And
Mm-hmm.
even when I write them, I struggle when I see them on the page.
Interesting. All right. So, what turned you on?
I thought about this. I would say surprisingly little. I feel like these questions either require like a very quick answer or like 45 minutes. And so I'll say surprisingly little.
Excellent. So, what turned you off then?
Well, I mean, I think what I would say to what turns me off is also surprisingly little.
Okay. All right. So, what is your idea of happiness then?
It's definitely 100%. It's reading books to my kids at night. That moment where we're about to enter into that sleep stage, and it's just us and a book, and kind of seeing where it goes is when I'm happiest.
Yes. Who is your favorite author?
Shirley Jackson, without a doubt.
Excellent. If you could be any character from any well-known novel throughout history, who would you be?
It would be Maddie Ross in Charles Portis's True Grit.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of am in love with her and would like to be her.
Excellent. I like that answer. What other profession besides your own would you want to attempt?
I mean, if I could stay around books, I'd like to be a librarian. I like that community aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. What profession would you least want to do?
I mean, anything that's food service, there's no way I could handle it.
Retail.
Anything customer service related,
Yeah,
honestly.
just retail. Oof. Okay, so if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you reach the check-in desk?
I mean, this is such a complicated question, and I think at the heart of it, I'd rather God not say anything and just let me kind of move into whatever comes next. I think God would be smart enough to know that I can't handle conversation in that moment, right? Like, I just need to kind of get in those gates and see what's going on. So
Excellent.
silence.
Awkwardness. Excellent. All right. Thank you, Kevin Wilson, for being on our show, and good luck to you. Your books, Nothing to See Here, amazing. The Family Fang, also amazing. Thank you for being on our show.
Oh, thanks, Scott. I really appreciate it.